she was not born into an easy life. From the very beginning, her story was filled with challenges that would have broken many people, but she was not someone who gave up easily. As a young girl, she had big dreams like everyone else, but circumstances forced her to grow up faster than she wanted. Well, she got married early, thinking life would finally become easier. But fate had a different plan for her. The marriage did not last, and soon she found herself standing alone, holding her baby in her arms, with no one to rely on but herself. Being a single mother is never easy, but for her, it was especially difficult. She had very little education, no special skills, and no family support that could help her financially. Every day was a struggle between making sure her child was fed and keeping a roof over their heads. She worked multiple small jobs, but it was never enough. Bills piled up, rent was always due, and food costs seemed impossible to manage. Yet, through all of this, she never lost her determination. She found work as a custodian at a large company. Some people might look down on such a job, but for her, it was a blessing. It meant steady money every month, and it meant her child could have meals and some sense of security. She took pride in her work. Every evening, when others went home to their families, she arrived at the office with her cleaning supplies. The shining glass doors, the empty hallways, and the quiet offices became her world. While the company's employees left after long meetings, she was the one who swept up the coffee stains, cleared away the papers, and polished the tables so the building could look new again the next morning. The work was tiring, often thankless, but she never complained. She knew she was doing what needed to be done. She wore simple clothes, tied her hair back, and carried herself with dignity. Nobody paid much attention to her. To most people in the company, she was invisible, just another custodian moving silently through the offices. But deep inside, she carried a sharp mind and an unbreakable spirit. Her evenings were long, but she used them well. As she cleaned, she listened. She overheard fragments of conversations left behind in meeting rooms. She read the charts and notes left on whiteboards before wiping them away. Sometimes she even picked up discarded documents and glanced at them out of curiosity. While she never had a formal education in business or science, her natural intelligence helped her understand more than anyone realized. Little by little, she began to grasp how the company worked, what kind of problems they faced, and how high the stakes were. But outside of work, her life was filled with sacrifices. She would return home late at night, often exhausted, only to wake up early to prepare her child for school. She rarely bought anything for herself. New clothes, outings, or luxuries were out of the question. Every dollar mattered, and every bit of energy had to be saved for her child. Still, she kept a smile on her face because she wanted her child to feel loved, not burdened. Her neighbors sometimes wondered how she managed. They saw her rushing to work, carrying grocery bags, helping her child with homework, and then heading out again for her night shift. They whispered about how hard her life was, but she never cared about gossip. She had no time for pity. She only cared about building a better future. And yet, despite all the struggles, she never lost her sense of hope. There was always a small fire burning inside her, a belief that someday something would change. She didn't know how or when, but she believed her hard work and patience would pay off. Perhaps it was this hope that kept her strong, even during the darkest days. She also had a habit of observing people closely. While most employees ignored her, she paid attention to everything around her. She noticed how some people were always rushing, how others argued in meetings, and how the CEO carried himself with confidence, but also with worry in his eyes. These small details stayed in her mind. She might not have been sitting in those meetings, but in her own way, she was always learning. At times, she thought about her own dreams. What if she had a chance to show what she was capable of? What if someone believed in her the way she believed in herself? But those thoughts often faded as quickly as they came. Reality was different. She was just a custodian, and in the eyes of others, her only role was to clean. Still, she carried on, day after day, silently holding on to the belief that life had something greater in store for her. She never realized that her chance to prove herself was coming sooner than she imagined. All the nights she spent cleaning offices and silently watching from the background were preparing her for a moment that would not only change her life, but also shock the entire company. What looked like an ordinary life of struggle was actually the beginning of an extraordinary story that no one could have predicted. Asterisk, the company where she worked as a custodian was nothing small. From the outside, it looked powerful and untouchable. Its tall glass buildings stood proudly in the city, and people often imagined that only the most brilliant minds worked inside. Employees in sharp suits rushed through the lobby each morning, carrying laptops and coffee cups, ready to attend meetings that seemed too important for outsiders to understand. To the world, this was a place of success. A company that had built its name over years of hard work and innovation. But behind the polished walls and smiling front desk, a storm was brewing. The company was facing a problem so large that it threatened everything they had built. It wasn't just a small mistake or a financial hiccup. It was a $500 million disaster waiting to explode. Something deep within their system had gone terribly wrong. Money was being lost, projects were failing, and deadlines were being missed. The problem had grown so big that no one could ignore it anymore. Inside the boardrooms, the atmosphere was tense. The CEO, usually calm and confident, now carried stress on his face. Meetings grew longer and arguments grew louder. The executives, who once looked so certain, now doubted themselves. Charts, spreadsheets, and reports filled the tables. But instead of providing answers, they only reminded everyone how close the company was to collapse. Every employee felt the pressure. Managers snapped at their teams. Workers stayed late, hoping to find a breakthrough, but each night they left frustrated. Whispers spread through the hallways. Will the company survive this? What if we lose our jobs? Some even updated their resumes. Fearing the worst, the CEO brought in outside consultants, specialists, who were paid enormous amounts of money just to look at the problem. They came in with confidence, promising to find answers. But after days and weeks of analysis, even they were lost. The problem was complex, hidden deep in layers of numbers, contracts, and systems. For every possible solution they offered, new risks appeared. Each attempt to fix the issue seemed to create even bigger problems. Meanwhile, the employees tried to continue their daily work. The building still had to function, meetings had to take place, and deadlines had to be attempted, even if failure seemed certain. The company still looked polished to outsiders, but the people inside knew the truth. New was like a giant machine breaking down, piece by piece. And in the middle of all this chaos was the custodian. She came in quietly each evening, wearing her uniform, pushing her cart with cleaning supplies. While executives debated in one room, she was outside wiping the windows. While managers slammed their fists on the table, she swept the hallway floors. She was part of the company, yet invisible to most of them. But unlike others, she wasn't stressed about stock prices or contracts. She observed. She listened. She noticed things that others ignored. While the executives argued endlessly about complicated strategies, she saw simple patterns. She noticed how problems were always connected to the same topics. She picked up stray documents left on desks, scanned the whiteboards before erasing them, and slowly began to understand the bigger picture. For her, this was fascinating. She may not have had a business degree, but she had a sharp, curious mind. Each night felt like a puzzle was being laid in front of her. As the company's employees drowned in panic, she found herself piecing together information like a detective. The pressure on the CEO was unbearable. Reporters started asking questions. Investors demanded updates. The board of directors, who had always supported him, began to doubt his leadership. He had built his reputation on solving tough problems, but this time, even he felt powerless. He spent long nights staring at reports, searching for anything that could turn things around. Morale sank lower each day. The employees who once wore their company badge with pride now felt ashamed. Rumors of layoffs spread like wildfire. Entire teams worried about their futures, and the once lively cafeteria grew quieter. People ate quickly, avoiding eye contact, as if the weight of the company's failure was pressing down on everyone's shoulders. And yet, no one thought of the custodian. To them, she was simply the woman who mopped the floors and emptied the trash cans. They didn't know that she, too, was carrying the company's problem in her mind. They didn't realize that while they argued over charts and theories, she was quietly connecting the dots. The $500 million problem had become a monster haunting the entire organization. But monsters are not always defeated by the strongest warriors or the smartest generals. Sometimes they fall because of the simplest observation, the sharpest eye, or the courage of someone no one expected. Each night, as she pushed her cart past the glowing glass offices, she couldn't help but think, why can't they see it? The answer looked so clear. But who would listen to her? She was just the custodian, after all. Little did anyone know. The storm inside the company was about to meet its most unlikely lightning bolt. The single mom who swept the floors was holding a solution powerful enough to save the empire. While the executives fought to save their empire. She quietly moved through the same rooms they filled with panic. Every night, after the chaos of the day settled down, she entered with her cart, mop, and cleaning supplies. To most people, she was invisible, just a custodian who came after hours to erase the mess of their failure. But in truth, she was more than a cleaner. She was an observer. Her work was simple but steady. She emptied trash bins, sprayed down tables, and wiped away fingerprints from glass doors. Yet, in between each task, her eyes wandered. She noticed the documents scattered on desks, the scribbled notes left on whiteboards, and the diagrams taped to walls. These weren't just random marks to her. They were pieces of a story. Every room she entered seemed to whisper clues about the company's $500 million problem. She wasn't supposed to pay attention. But she couldn't help herself. She had always been curious by nature, and even though she had no degree or training in business, her mind loved patterns. She remembered numbers. She noticed repetitions. She saw how one department's notes connected to another's, while the managers drowned in complicated explanations. She saw simplicity. Sometimes she overheard conversations as she cleaned. Executives stayed late, arguing loudly, believing no one was paying attention. But she was there, dusting shelves or polishing the floor just a few feet away. She never interrupted. She simply listened. Words like leak, system failure, and oversight repeated again and again. She stored them in her mind, weaving them together like threads in a fabric. She often wondered if she was imagining things. Could she really understand? A problem that highly paid experts couldn't solve. But each night, as the puzzle grew clearer, her confidence grew too. She wasn't solving it on purpose. It was as if the pieces naturally aligned in her mind. At home, while helping her child. With homework, she found herself thinking about the problem again. She compared it to simple things in daily life like fixing a leaky pipe or balancing a small budget. She realized that the problem wasn't as impossible as the executives believed. In fact, their mistake was overcomplicating it. They were too close to the issue, too stressed to see the obvious. The irony made her smile sometimes. Here was a group of people with years of education and experience. panicking over a solution that seemed almost embarrassingly simple when viewed from the outside. And here she was, a single mom, cleaning their offices at night, quietly holding the answer in her head. But she never spoke of it to anyone. Who would believe her? If she approached an executive and tried to explain, they might laugh or dismiss her immediately. She was, in their eyes, just the custodian. No matter how right she was, her position in the company gave her no voice. Still, she couldn't stop paying attention. Each night, she treated the offices like a classroom, and herself as the student. Every note she wiped from a whiteboard was another lesson. Every crumpled piece of paper she collected was another clue. Slowly, she became more knowledgeable about the company's crisis than many of the employees themselves. And yet, no one knew. They passed her in the hallways without a glance. Executives walked by, too consumed by their worries to even notice the woman who quietly studied their every move. She was the invisible witness to their failure and, perhaps, the only one with the solution. One evening, she lingered in the main boardroom after everyone had gone. On the large screen, someone had left a chart open. She studied it for a long time, her mop resting against the wall. The chart was filled with numbers, arrows, and red warning signs. To the average person, it looked overwhelming. But to her, the problem stood out clearly, like a single stain on an otherwise clean floor. She tilted her head, thought for a moment, and whispered to herself, "Why can't they see this? It's right there." Her heart pounded as she realized just how close she was to understanding it fully. She laughed softly at the irony. The same hands that scrubbed their floors might also hold the power to save their company. But fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if she spoke up and embarrassed herself in front of everyone? She couldn't risk losing her job, the only stable income keeping her child fed. And yet, the thought nagged at her every night. The answer was too important to ignore. She became more restless. Cleaning wasn't just cleaning anymore. It was like walking through a battlefield of secrets. Every piece of information confirmed what she already knew. She wasn't just observing anymore. She was certain. The company was sinking fast, and she carried in her mind the lifeline that could save it. But she was still silent, still invisible, waiting for the moment when courage would finally overpower fear. And that moment was coming. The nights had become routine: mop the floors, dust the shelves, wipe the boards, gather the trash, and move on to the next room. Yet lately, she no longer felt like she was only cleaning. She felt like she was walking through a giant puzzle, and every room she entered handed her another missing piece. She didn't seek them out, they almost called to her. A number written too many times on a paper, a diagram erased halfway, a set of notes left behind after a meeting. They all whispered the same story. Her mind was restless. Even after work, when she returned home to her modest apartment, she couldn't let go of the problem. She would sit at the small kitchen table, sipping cheap tea, while her child slept. In the next room, bills were stacked in front of her, a painful reminder of how tight money always was. But instead of focusing on them, she found herself replaying the company's issue in her mind. She didn't have access to all the official reports or tools, but she had something else: clarity. She wasn't drowning in stress or pride like the executives were. She was outside of it, free to see what they couldn't. One particular night, she was cleaning the main conference room. The air still smelled faintly of coffee and tension, proof of the heated meeting that had ended hours earlier. Papers were scattered across the long, polished table. She carefully gathered them, as usual, but one page caught her eye. It was a chart, messy with arrows and highlighted figures. To someone else, it might have looked complicated. To her, it looked like a pattern. She froze, staring at it, her rag hanging limp in her hand. Something about the chart connected all the thoughts she had been carrying. She sat down at the edge of the chair, something she never did during workhand. Leaned closer. Her heart began to race as she traced the lines with her finger. "Wait a minute," she whispered. Suddenly, everything fit. All the little clues she had been collecting in her mind, the overheard arguments, the numbers she remembered, the diagrams she had erased, came together like a puzzle snapping into place. It wasn't a complicated solution at all. In fact, it was shockingly simple. The executives had been circling around it for weeks, blinded by their own complicated thinking, but she saw it instantly. Her eyes widened, and a laugh escaped her lips, though it was half disbelieving. Could it really be this simple? Could she, a custodian, have figured out what all the experts missed? She leaned back in the chair, clutching the paper in her hands. Her chest felt tight, not from fear, but from excitement. She thought about it again and again, replaying it in her mind. The more she considered it, the clearer it became. Yes, she was certain. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't imagining things. She had the answer. For a long moment, she sat in silence. The empty boardroom around her echoing with the weight of what she had just realized. She imagined the CEO's face, if he knew. She pictured the executives, shocked into silence. And then, she imagined what this could mean for her life, for her child's life. Could this be the moment that changed everything? But just as quickly, fear crept in. What if she was wrong? What if she spoke up and made a fool of herself? They would laugh, dismiss her, maybe even fire her for daring to cross a line. After all, she wasn't part of their world. She was the woman who emptied their trash cans, not the woman who solved their crises. She set the paper down and pressed her hands together, breathing heavily. Inside her mind, two voices battled. One told her to stay silent, to play it safe, to protect the only job she had. The other whispered that this was her chance, a once-in-a-lifetime moment that she couldn't let pass. As she mopped the floor, her reflection stared back at her in the polished shine. She looked tired, worn from years of hard work, but her eyes were alive. They carried a spark she hadn't seen in herself for years. God. That spark frightened her, but it also thrilled her. It was the spark of possibility, of destiny, knocking at her door. That night at home, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling in the dim light, her thoughts racing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the solution again, clearer and clearer. She wanted to dismiss it, to push it away, but she couldn't. It was real, it was right. And deep inside, she knew she couldn't ignore it. The next morning, while preparing breakfast for her child, she caught herself smiling. For the first time in years, she felt powerful. She looked at her child across the table and thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the moment our lives change forever. She packed her cleaning supplies as usual, tied her hair back, and put on her uniform. But she wasn't the same woman who walked into that building every night before. She carried a secret now. A secret bigger than anything the company's executives could imagine. She didn't yet know how she would share it, or even if she had the courage to. But the spark of insight had already been lit inside her. And once a fire is lit, it's impossible to put out. The custodian who had been invisible all her life had just discovered. She was holding the key to saving a $500 million empire. And she could no longer look at herself or the world the same way again. Asterisk for days. She carried the secret like a weight in her chest. Every night she returned to the building, pushing her cart down the long, glossy hallways. But now the mop and broom in her hands felt lighter compared to the heavy decisions sitting on her shoulders. She had the solution. She was certain of it, yet she stayed silent, watching as the executives drowned deeper and deeper in confusion. She saw their faces through the glass walls of the conference rooms creased with exhaustion, red with frustration, pale with fear. She heard their angry voices echoing late into the night, shouting across the table, desperate for answers. Some nights she found coffee cups left half full, their contents cold, as if even caffeine wasn't enough to keep hope alive. And always. She wiped their boards clean, erased their notes, picked up their forgotten papers, and silently held the truth inside her heart. The thought tormented her. What if they never find the answer? What if the company collapses? This wasn't just about executives losing power. Thousands of employees' jobs were on the line. Families depended on this company. And deep down, she knew that if she stayed quiet, she would forever regret it. But the fear was just as strong. Who would take her seriously? She wasn't a consultant with a polished suit. She wasn't a manager with a corner office. She was the custodian, a single mother trying to survive. If she dared to speak, she risked humiliation or worse. Losing her only source of income one evening as she was mopping outside the boardroom. She overheard the CEO's voice, tired, strained, unlike the confident tone she was used to hearing. "We're running out of time," he said. "If we don't fix this now, we're done." The silence that followed was heavier than anything she had ever felt. She stopped mid-motion, leaning on her mop, her heart thudding in her chest. In that silence, her decision was made. She couldn't keep the answer to herself anymore. She had to try, no matter the risk. That night, she went home restless. She tucked her child into bed and sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at the cracked tiles on the wall. The fear clawed at her visions of being laughed at, dismissed, escorted out of the building, but alongside the fear was a voice, small but steady, telling her this was her chance. If not now, then when? She practiced the words in her mind, imagining how she might approach the CEO. She thought about how to explain her idea without sounding foolish. She reminded herself that what she had wasn't a wild guess, it was a clear, simple solution. Still, her hands trembled at the thought of facing him. The next day, she put on her uniform with a sense of determination she had never felt before. She tied her hair neatly, as if preparing for battle. When she arrived at the building, her heart pounded with every step. She cleaned as usual, but her eyes kept flicking toward the CEO's office. Her chance would come, she told herself. She just had to be brave enough to take it. Late that night, after another long meeting ended, she saw him walking alone down the hallway. His shoulders were slumped, his steps heavy. For the first time, he didn't look like the untouchable leader of a powerful empire. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. She gripped her rag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her throat went dry, but she forced herself to take a step forward. Then another. Her cart squeaked softly against the floor as she pushed it aside. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The CEO stopped and turned, surprised. No one ever spoke to him like that, least of all the custodian. "Yes," he asked, his tone polite but guarded. She swallowed hard. Her heart was beating so loudly she feared he could hear it. I know what the problem is," she said. For a moment, silence filled the hallway. The CEO blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. Then he frowned slightly, curious. "You? What did you say?" Her knees shook, but she held her ground. "I've been cleaning the room, sir. I hear the meetings. I see the papers left behind. And I've been paying attention. I think I know how to fix it." Normally, a CEO might have dismissed such a claim, but something about her eyes stopped him. They weren't the eyes of someone joking or desperate for attention. They were steady, clear, and full of conviction. Against all logic, he felt himself leaning in. "Go on," he said quietly. She took a deep breath, steadying her voice. Then she explained, in just a few sentences, simple, precise. She laid out the solution. It wasn't wrapped in complicated jargon. It wasn't buried under endless analysis. It was clear, direct, and undeniable. As the words left her mouth, the CEO's expression changed. First confusion, then realization, then shock. He stared at her, speechless, as if he had just seen a ghost. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. Her chest tightened. Had she gone too far? Would he laugh? But then, slowly, the CEO placed his hand against his forehead and let out a breathless laugh. "My God," he whispered. "How did we not see this?" She stood frozen, her hands trembling, not knowing what to say. He looked back at her, his eyes wide with something she had never seen in him before: respect. "You may have just saved this company," he said. At that moment, the fear that had haunted her melted away. She realized she had done the impossible. The custodian, the invisible single mom who spent her nights cleaning up after others, had just stepped into the light and changed everything. What happened next would not only shock the entire company, but also transform her life forever. The CEO could not sleep that night. The words of the custodian replayed in his mind again and again. He sat in his office long after she had gone home, staring at the whiteboard filled with complicated strategies, all of them useless compared to the simple, precise explanation she had given him in seconds. It was unbelievable. Could it really be this easy? Could a woman with no title, no degree, no position in the company have seen what everyone else missed? The next morning, he called his executive team into the boardroom. The air was heavy as usual. Consultants with polished suits carried folders of data. Department heads shuffled in nervously, and managers prepared for another exhausting debate. But today, the CEO looked different. There was a sharpness in his eyes, a spark of hope that had been missing for weeks. When everyone settled, he stood at the head of the table and said firmly, "We're going to try something different today. I want you all to hear a new idea." The executives exchanged confused glances. A new idea? From where? They had already exhausted every possibility. Consultants cleared their throats, ready to defend their costly suggestions. No one expected. What came next? The CEO cleared his throat. "Last night, someone shared a perspective with me. It was unusual, but it made sense." "Who?" one of the executives asked, frowning. The CEO paused. He knew if he said it outright, they would dismiss it immediately. Still, he had promised himself he would not let pride stand in the way of truth. It was one of our custodians. The room erupted with disbelief. A custodian. The murmurs rose quickly. "Impossible. You can't be serious. We're wasting time." But the CEO held up his hand. "Listen first. Judge after." Reluctantly, the room quieted. The CEO picked up a marker and repeated her explanation on the whiteboard, step by step. He spoke in her words, simple and clear, without jargon. At first, the executives sat stiff, their faces doubtful. But as the idea unfolded, the tension began to shift. One by one, their brows furrowed not in confusion, but in realization. They leaned forward, whispering to each other, pointing at the diagrams. The consultant who had charged millions of dollars for his analysis dropped his pen, stunned. "Wait." One manager said slowly, "If we apply this here," he scribbled some figures on his notepad. His eyes widened. "It actually works. The numbers align perfectly." Another executive jumped in, flipping through documents. "We've been overcomplicating it. This explains everything." Soon the room buzzed with energy, but this time it was different. There was no shouting, no panic. It was shock. It was disbelief turning into excitement. They tested her idea against the data, and every time it worked. What had seemed impossible for weeks unraveled in minutes. The CEO stood quietly at the head of the table, watching them. He already knew it was right. He had seen it the moment she explained it. but watching his hardened team, the so-called brightest minds in the company, realized that the solution had come from a woman who cleaned their floors, filled him with a strange mixture of pride and shame. Pride in her brilliance, shame in their blindness. Finally, one of the executives leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. How did we miss this? The CEO didn't answer. Instead, he said softly, sometimes the clearest answers come from the people we least expect. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what he meant. They had ignored her, overlooked her, seen her as invisible. Yet she had done what none of them could. That afternoon, the solution was put into action. Departments scrambled to adjust systems, processes were corrected, and operations were restructured according to her insight. Within hours, the results began to show. The leak was plugged. The failing project regained balance. What had threatened to sink the company for good was suddenly under control by evening. The CEO received the first reports. The company had saved hundreds of millions almost instantly. The nightmare that had kept them awake for weeks had ended in a single day. Word spread quickly through the building. Employees who had been preparing for layoffs now buzzed with cautious hope. Managers who had been drowning in panic now whispered about the mystery solution that had saved them. No one knew the full story yet, but they felt the shift. The building itself seemed lighter, as though a dark cloud had finally lifted, and at the center of it all was the custodian. She arrived that night as usual, pushing her cart, her uniform crisp, her face calm. But everything around her was different. The same executives who once walked past her without a glance now looked at her with curiosity. Whispers followed her through the hallways. Is that her? Could it really be true? She said nothing. She simply continued her work, mopping the floors, emptying bins, cleaning the glass. But inside, her heart swelled with quiet triumph. She had done it. She had saved them. Later that night, as she polished the main lobby, the CEO himself approached her. This time, he didn't carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He smiled, genuine and warm. You were right, he said softly. You saved us. Her hands froze on the rag, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. She looked at him, her eyes wide. I just wanted to help. He shook his head. You did more than help. You did what none of us could. His voice dropped, filled with respect. You reminded us that brilliance has no uniform, no title, no office. It can come from anywhere, even from the person we've all overlooked. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. For the first time in her life, someone had truly seen her not as just a custodian, not as just a single mom, but as a mind and a force that mattered. That night, the company's future was saved. But more importantly, something deeper had changed. A woman who had always been invisible had become unforgettable. The company had been rescued. But the story was far from over. Numbers on a spreadsheet could prove that the crisis was ending. But there was still something deeper that had to be addressed. For weeks, the company had lived in fear, staring into the mouth of disaster. Now, thanks to a single voice, an unexpected voice, they had survived. And the CEO knew that this story had to be told. For 2 days, he walked the halls of the building with a quiet, thoughtful expression. He watched his employees begin to breathe again, saw the tension start to leave their shoulders. But he also saw something else: shame. Whispers moved through the offices. Everyone had heard rumors about who had given the solution. Some dismissed it, some didn't believe it, but the truth was out. The custodian had done what the board, the consultants, and the senior executives could not. The CEO understood the power of moments. He had built his career on timing, knowing when to take risks, when to step forward, and when to hold back. Now, he knew was one of those defining moments. If he let this story fade into whispers, it would be forgotten or twisted. But if he lifted it up, if he told the truth openly, it could inspire not just his company, but everyone watching. So he called for an all-company meeting. It was unusual. No one expected a gathering like this, unless there was an announcement of layoffs or a major shift in leadership. The auditorium filled quickly. Employees sat in rows, murmuring with unease. Managers whispered theories. Consultants sat stiff, their polished shoes tapping nervously on the floor. The custodian came too, though she had been hesitant. When she received the invitation, she thought it was a mistake. Why would she need to attend such a meeting? But something told her she should go. She sat quietly near the back, her uniform playing against the sea of business suits. Her hands rested in her lap, her heart pounding as if it already knew what was coming. The CEO stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. He stood tall, but his eyes carried the weight of the past weeks. He began simply, "Not long ago, this company was staring at a crisis so severe it threatened our very existence. We faced a $500 million problem that none of us could solve." Murmurs spread across the room. Everyone knew the story. He continued, "We brought in experts. We held endless meetings. We worked long nights. And yet, the answer remained out of reach." Until he paused, his gaze scanning the crowd. His eyes softened almost like he was smiling, until someone unexpected stepped forward. The room shifted. Employees leaned forward. The consultants sat straighter. The CEO's voice grew stronger. "Our solution did not come from the boardroom. It did not come from outside consultants. It came from one of our own, someone most of us have overlooked for far too long. It came from a custodian." A wave of shock spread through the audience. Heads turned, people whispered. Some searched the room, trying to spot her. The CEO raised his hand. "She is here with us now." All eyes shifted to the back, where she sat, frozen in her chair. Her face flushed as hundreds of gazes landed on her. For a moment, she wished she could disappear into the floor. But the CEO beckoned gently. "Please, stand." Her legs trembled as she rose. The room seemed impossibly large, and yet impossibly quiet. Every single person was staring at her, the woman who, until yesterday, had been invisible. The CEO's voice rang out again, steady and proud. This woman, with no title, no office, and no degree in business, saw what none of us could. She solved the problem that saved this company. The silence lasted only a second before it broke into thunderous applause. The sound filled the auditorium, echoing off the walls. People stood to their feet, clapping harder, louder. Managers who had walked past her without a glance now clapped with tears in their eyes. Even the consultants, stiff and proud, were forced to stand in recognition. She stood there, stunned, her hands shaking, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. Never in her life had she been seen like this. Never had anyone looked at her with respect, with admiration, with gratitude. The CEO raised his hand for silence once more. "Let this be a reminder," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "that brilliance has no uniform. Talent has no title. Genius can come from anywhere." And the next time we look around for answers, we must remember that the voices we ignore may be the very ones that can save us. The applause rose again, louder than before, shaking the walls. She lowered her head, overwhelmed, but deep inside, something unshakable bloomed. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. Not as a custodian, not as a struggling single mother, but as someone who mattered. After the meeting, people she had never spoken to came up to her. They shook her hand, thanked her, even asked her questions with genuine respect. Some apologized for ignoring her all these years. She smiled shyly, unable to find the right words, but her heart was light. The CEO himself walked her out of the auditorium. He leaned closer and said quietly, "You didn't just save this company. You reminded all of us what leadership truly means. It means listening even to the voices we overlook." She nodded, her throat tight with emotion. For years, she had worked in silence, invisible to those around her. Now, in one bold move, in one spark of courage, she had not only changed her life, but also transformed the culture of an entire company. And as she walked through the halls that night, cart in front of her, uniform still the same, something had shifted forever. She was no longer invisible. Asterisk, when she returned home that night, the applause still echoed in her ears. She sat at her kitchen table in silence, staring at the flickering light above, replaying the day over and over again. Her uniform was still dusty from work, her hands still smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, but something inside her had shifted. For years, she had seen herself only as a custodian, a single mother doing whatever she could to survive. But now, she was something else too, proof that greatness can come from anywhere. Her child, still small and innocent, ran to her with open arms. She hugged them tightly, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "Everything is going to be different now." And for once, she believed it. The next few days were a whirlwind. The CEO personally invited her to his office not to clean, but to sit down across from him as an equal. He spoke with genuine warmth. "We want to do more than just thank you," he told her. "We want you to be part of this company in a new way." She blinked in disbelief. "But I don't have a degree. I'm not trained." The CEO smiled. "What you have is more valuable than degrees. You have insight, courage, and clarity that cannot be taught in schools." For the first time in her life, she was offered a seat at the table. They gave her a new role, not just a promotion, but a position where her ideas would be heard. She was invited to meetings, asked for opinions, treated with respect. The same rooms she used to clean became the very rooms where she now spoke. At first, she was shy. Years of being overlooked had made her doubt herself. But little by little, she grew more confident. She realized she had been training for this moment her entire life. Struggle had sharpened her. Listening had made her wise. Observing had made her quick. She was not an outsider anymore. She was exactly where she belonged. Her coworkers' attitudes changed too. Those who once walked past her without a glance now stopped to greet her with genuine smiles. Some even asked for her advice. She carried herself humbly, never letting pride take over. But deep inside, she knew she had earned their respect. The media soon picked up the story. Single mom custodian saves $500 million, company became a headline that spread like wildfire. Journalists wanted interviews. TV stations invited her to share her journey. People across the world were moved by her story, how a woman's society had overlooked, had risen to solve a problem that brilliant minds could not. Messages poured in from strangers. Single mothers wrote to her, saying she gave them hope. Workers in low-paying jobs said she made them feel proud again. Students said her story inspired them to believe in themselves. She became a symbol not just of intelligence, but of resilience and courage. But for her, the greatest change wasn't fame or recognition. It was the way her child looked at her. One evening, as they sat together at the table, her child said softly, "Mom, I always knew you were special. Now everyone else knows too." Those words meant more to her than any applause ever could. The CEO also made a promise to her. He introduced new company programs that gave employees at every level, janitors, assistants, clerks, the chance to share their ideas. No voice should ever be ignored, he said at a company-wide event. And he credited her for inspiring the change. Her life improved in practical ways, too. She no longer worried about rent. She could finally buy her child new clothes without calculating every coin. The stress that once haunted her late at night began to fade. She even allowed herself small joys, an occasional dinner at a restaurant, a family trip, a few books she had always wanted to read. But even with all the changes, she never forgot who she was or where she came from. She still greeted the custodians with warmth, sometimes even helping them carry supplies when she passed them in the hall. "I was one of you," she told them with a smile, a tie, "and I always will be." Her story spread far beyond the walls of the company. Universities invited her to speak to students about courage and innovation. Nonprofits honored her for inspiring women and workers around the world. But every time she stood on a stage, looking out at a crowd, she always said the same thing: don't ever let anyone tell you your voice doesn't matter. Great ideas don't wear suits. They can come from anyone, anywhere, even someone holding a mop. The CEO, who once thought the company's survival depended only on experts, often told her privately, "You saved not only this company, but me. You reminded me that leadership is about listening to every single person, no matter who they are." Years later, people still remembered her story. Employees told new hires about the custodian who saved the company. Her name became a legend. In the hallways, a reminder that no one should ever be underestimated. And for her, the true transformation was not just external, it was within. She no longer walked with her head down. She no longer saw herself as invisible. She had faced the impossible, spoken up when it terrified her, and changed her life forever. She carried herself with quiet dignity, not because of the recognition she received, but because she finally believed in her own worth. Her journey had begun as a struggle for survival, but it ended as a story of triumph. Single mother, once overlooked and underestimated, had risen from the shadows to rewrite not only her destiny, but also the destiny of an entire company. And as the years passed, one truth remained clear: sometimes the most extraordinary heroes are found in the most ordinary places.